A retired man had already learned how to live with almost nothing. But when he realized his black horse was slowly dying, he made a quiet sacrifice that no one ever saw, except the horse. Before we begin, subscribe, like, and leave a comment to help us keep bringing emotional stories from the heartland to people who believe in loyalty, compassion, and silent courage. 81-year-old Henry Caldwell noticed a change before anyone else could have. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't sudden. It was subtle, the kind of thing only someone who loved deeply would see. The black horse, Moro, still walked the fence every morning, still lifted his head when Henry stepped onto the porch, still breathed warm air into the cold dawn like he always had. But his coat no longer shone. His ribs pressed faintly through the dark hair, and his steps had grown slower, careful. Henry saw at the moment. He ran his hand along Moro's side, too sharp. His fingers lingered, tracing bone where strength used to be. Henry swallowed hard and looked away, as if the horse might feel his fear. "You're just getting old," Henry murmured gently. "Same as me." But deep down, Henry knew better. The pasture was quiet that morning. Too quiet. Moro grazed half-heartedly, tearing at the grass without urgency, as if eating were now a chore instead of instinct. Henry leaned against the fence, watching. He remembered another time like this. Years ago, when his wife had stopped finishing her meals, when she smiled and said she was fine, even as her body quietly surrendered. The memory made Henry's chest tighten. "No," he whispered. "Not you too." Henry fetched the brush and began grooming Moro slowly, deliberately. With each stroke, more hair came loose than should have. Moro didn't protest, didn't shift his weight. He simply stood there, head lowered, breathing shallowly. That scared Henry more than anything. Strong animals fought pain. Tired ones endured it. Henry pressed his forehead briefly against the horse's neck, closing his eyes. "I'm here," he whispered. "I won't let you fade alone." Inside the small farmhouse, Henry opened the cupboard and stared at the shelves. They were nearly empty. A can of soup, half a loaf of bread, a small jar of oats. He hadn't been hungry much lately. Not really. His pension barely covered heat and medicine. Food was something he learned to stretch, to skip. Henry closed the cupboard slowly. Then he looked back out the window. Moro stood by the fence, waiting. That was when Henry made the decision. He pulled on his coat, tucked his hands into his pockets, and walked down the long dirt road toward town. His steps were slow, careful, not from age alone but from resolve. At the feed store, Henry stood quietly while others ordered bags of grain and supplements. When it was his turn, he cleared his throat. "I need the best you've got," he said softly, "for an older horse." The clerk hesitated, glancing at Henry's worn coat. "That would be a bit expensive, sir." Henry nodded. "I know." He counted out bills slowly, money meant for groceries, for warmth for himself. When the clerk handed him the receipt, Henry folded it carefully, as if it were fragile. Back home, Henry mixed the feed with warm water, adding the last of the oats. He carried the bucket with both hands, arms trembling slightly. Moro lifted his head, nostrils flaring. The horse stepped forward, slowly, uncertainly, and lowered his muzzle into the bucket. He ate. Henry watched, unmoving, breath held. Moro ate until the bucket was empty. Then he lifted his head and looked at Henry, really looked at him. Henry smiled faintly, tears burning behind his eyes. "That's all right," he whispered. "You eat. I'll be fine." That night, Henry went to bed hungry and smiling, because while his body ached and his stomach was empty, the horse was still alive. Henry Caldwell woke before the sun, his stomach already aching with a familiar, hollow pain. It wasn't sharp, just constant, like a reminder he carried everywhere now. He sat up slowly on the edge of the bed, waiting for the dizziness to pass before standing. The house was cold. He pulled his sweater tighter around his thin frame and glanced toward the window. Outside, the pasture was wrapped in gray dawn, the grass wet with frost. And there, near the fence, stood Moro, still standing. Henry let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "That's good," he whispered. "That's very good." He shuffled into the kitchen and filled the kettle with what little water remained. There was no food left for him. Not really, but he poured a cup of hot water anyway, pretending it was tea. The warmth helped quiet the shaking in his hands. When he stepped outside with the feed bucket, Moro lifted his head immediately. His ears flicked forward, and for the first time in days, there was something like anticipation in his posture. Henry noticed the smallest change. It mattered more than anything. "You're hungry today," Henry said softly. "That's a good sign." Moro approached slowly, legs stiff but determined, and began to eat. Henry watched every movement, the way the horse chewed, the way his jaw worked, the way his breathing stayed steady. When the bucket was empty, Moro didn't step away right away. He lingered. Henry reached out, resting his hand against the horse's neck. The warmth beneath his palm felt real, alive. But when Henry slid his hand along Moro's side again, the bones were still there, too present. His smile faded. "You're not better," Henry murmured. "You're just holding." That afternoon, Henry made another choice. He walked to the small bedroom at the back of the house and opened a dresser drawer he rarely touched. Inside lay a neatly folded coat, thick, heavy, warm. His winter coat. He lifted it slowly, brushing dust from the sleeves. His wife had bought it for him years ago, laughing as she insisted he needed something decent for once. Henry held it against his chest for a moment, then he folded it back up. At the pawn shop in town, Henry said very little. He placed the coat on the counter and waited. The man behind the counter examined it, then nodded. "It's in good shape." Henry nodded too. It always was. When Henry left the shop, the cold bit deeper into his bones, but his pocket was heavier with cash. He didn't stop at the grocery store. He went straight to the feed store. That evening, Moro ate again. Slower this time, but with purpose. Henry sat on an overturned bucket nearby, watching his breath visible in the air. "I used to think love was loud," he said quietly. "Big gestures. Promises." Moro flicked an ear, listening. "Turns out," Henry continued, "it's quieter than that." The next days followed the same rhythm. Henry ate less. Moro ate more. Henry stopped buying meat. Then bread. Then anything that wasn't absolutely necessary. His belt tightened another notch. His hands shook more often. Neighbors began to notice. "You look thin, Henry," Mrs. Bell from down the road said one morning, handing him a jar of preserves. "You eating all right?" Henry smiled politely. "Plenty," he lied. He waited until she left before placing the jar carefully in the cupboard. For later. For emergencies. For Moro, if it came to that. One night, Henry woke to the sound of movement outside. He pulled himself from bed and stepped onto the porch, heart pounding. Moro stood alone near the fence, head lowered, breathing hard. His sides heaved with effort. Henry hurried toward him, legs trembling. "What is it, boy?" he whispered. Moro shifted, nearly stumbling. Henry caught himself just in time, pressing his shoulder against the horse's chest to steady him. The horse leaned into him, heavy, tired, trusting. Henry wrapped his arms around Moro's neck, holding him upright with everything he had left. "I've got you," he whispered urgently. "I've got you." They stood there for a long time, the old man and the sick horse sharing weight, sharing breath, sharing the quiet terror of knowing neither could hold much longer. Eventually, Moro steadied. Henry sank to the ground, exhausted, chest burning, vision blurred. He stayed there until dawn. The next morning, Henry didn't go to town. He opened a small wooden box where he kept his wife's things, letters, photographs, a simple gold ring. His fingers lingered on the ring. "I know," he whispered. "I know what you'd say." He closed the box gently and made another sacrifice. The morning Moro collapsed, Henry Caldwell knew before he reached the pasture that something was wrong. The fence was empty. Moro was never away from it at dawn. Even on his weakest days, he stood there, waiting, a dark shape against the pale morning, proof that he was still holding on. Henry's heart began to pound as he quickened his pace, ignoring the sharp protest in his knees and the dizzy fog pressing him behind his eyes. "Moro," he called, his voice thin with fear. He found the horse near the far oak tree, lying on his side in the frost-damp grass. For a terrifying second, Henry thought he was already too late. "No! No, no!" Henry whispered, dropping to his knees beside him. Morrow's chest rose shallowly. Fell. Rose again. Alive, but barely. Henry pressed his hand against the horse's neck, feeling the weak, fluttering pulse beneath the skin. Morrow's eye rolled toward him, dull and unfocused, but still aware. "I'm here," Henry said urgently. "I'm right here." The horse tried to move, legs trembling uselessly beneath him. A low, broken sound escaped his throat, not a whinny but a sound of exhaustion. Henry's hand shook as he tried to help him sit up, but Morrow's weight was too much now. The horse slumped back into grass, breathing fast, panicked. Henry felt something tear open in his chest. "This isn't working," he whispered. "What I'm doing, it's not enough." He had known this moment was coming, had felt it creeping closer with every skipped meal, every sacrificed comfort, every quiet lie told to concerned neighbors. But knowing did not make it easier. Henry forced himself to stand and staggered back toward the house, every step heavy with dread. Inside, he grabbed a phone from the wall, the one he hadn't used in months, because calling for help felt like admitting defeat. His fingers hovered over the numbers. A veterinarian. The cost flashed through his mind immediately. Money he didn't have. Money he'd already turned into feed. Henry swallowed hard and dialed anyway. When the vet arrived later that morning, she didn't waste time on false hope. She knelt beside Morrow, listening, examining, her expression growing more serious with every moment. "He's malnourished," she said gently. "Severely. There's also an underlying illness, possibly organ failure." Henry nodded slowly, as if he'd expected nothing else. "Can you help him?" The vet hesitated. "I can try, but it won't be quick, and it won't be cheap." Henry looked down at his hands, thin-veined, trembling. "I'll do whatever it takes," he said quietly. The vet studied him carefully. "Mr. Caldwell, you don't look well yourself." Henry forced a smile. "I'll manage." She didn't argue, but her eyes said she didn't believe him. The treatments began that afternoon. Fluids, medication, careful feeding. Henry stayed beside Morrow the entire time, holding the horse's head, whispering softly, pretending not to notice the way his own vision blurred when he stood too quickly. That night, Henry didn't go inside. He wrapped himself in a thin blanket and slept on the barn floor, back against the stall, listening to Morrow's uneven breathing. Every sound made him flinch. Every pause made his heart stop. Sometime before dawn, Henry woke to a strange quiet. Too quiet. He pushed himself upright, panic rising fast. "Morrow," he whispered. The horse stood, unsteadily but on his feet. Henry's breath caught. Morrow swayed, then took one slow step forward. Then another. Henry scrambled to his feet, reaching out just in time to steady him. "That's it," Henry breathed, tears spilling freely now. "That's it, boy." The horse leaned heavily into him, exhausted but upright. Henry laughed, a broken, joyful sound that hurt his chest. "You did it," he whispered. "You're still here." But as relief flooded in, something else followed immediately. A sharp, blinding dizziness. Henry's knees buckled. He hit the ground hard. Breath knocked from his lungs, the world spinning violently. Morrow startled, stumbling back, then lowering his head toward Henry with frantic concern. "I'm okay," Henry tried to say. The words didn't come. Henry's chest tightened painfully. His heart raced, then stuttered. Black spots danced in his vision. So this is the price, he thought dimly. He had given Morrow everything. And now, there was nothing left to give. Morrow nudged Henry urgently, then let out a loud, desperate cry, a sound that carried far beyond the barn, far beyond the quiet farm. Neighbors would hear it. Someone would come. Henry felt himself drifting, consciousness slipping like water through his fingers. But before the darkness fully claimed him, he felt something warm and solid press against his side. Morrow lay down beside him. The sick horse curled his body protectively around the old man, sharing warmth, breathing steadily, as if trying to give back what Henry had given him. Henry managed a faint smile. "You don't owe me anything," he whispered. barely audible. "I'd do it all again." The world faded to gray, and somewhere between breath and silence, the question hung heavy in the cold air. Had Henry saved the horse? Or had the horse come back in time to save him? Henry Caldwell did not hear the truck pull into the yard. He did not hear the door slam or the hurried footsteps crossing the frozen ground. Consciousness had slipped away from him gently, like sleep, leaving his body heavy and distant. What he did feel was warmth. Something solid pressed against his side. A steady rise and fall. Breath. Morrow. The black horse lay beside him. His thin body curved protectively around Henry's frail frame, sharing what little heat he had left. His breathing was shallow but constant, deliberate, as if the horse understood that stopping was not an option. When Mrs. Bell and her husband reached the barn, the sight froze them in place. "Oh, my God," Mrs. Bell whispered. Henry lay motionless on the ground, skin pale, lips dry, and beside him, impossibly close, lay the horse everyone thought might not survive the week. "He's still breathing," Mr. Bell said urgently, kneeling down. "Barely." They called for help immediately. As they waited, Morrow did not move. Not when they approached, not when they knelt, not even when they gently touched Henry's shoulder. He lifted his head just once, eyes wide and dark, watching every movement, not aggressive, not afraid, just alert, present, guarding. The paramedics arrived quickly, voices calm, practiced. They checked Henry's pulse, applied oxygen, lifted him carefully onto the stretcher. Morrow rose shakily to his feet the moment Henry was moved, letting out a low, strained sound that tore through the quiet barn. "It's okay," Mrs. Bell said softly, holding out her hands. "We're helping him." Morrow stepped back only when forced, eyes locked on Henry as the stretcher was carried away. The barn felt impossibly empty after. Henry woke 2 days later. The ceiling above him was unfamiliar, white and still. Machines hummed quietly at his bedside. His chest felt tight, sore but moving, alive. A nurse noticed his eyes open and smiled gently. "Welcome back, Mr. Caldwell." Henry swallowed, throat raw. "The horse," he whispered. "Please tell me." "He's alive," she said quickly. "And resting. The vet says he's responding to treatment." Henry closed his eyes as tears slipped free. Relief hit him harder than pain ever had. The doctor arrived soon after, expression serious but not unkind. "You were very close," he said honestly. "Severe dehydration, malnutrition, cardiac stress." Henry nodded weakly. "I know. You nearly starved yourself," the doctor continued. "Why?" Henry stared at his hands. Thin, trembling, because he was starving first. The doctor exhaled slowly. "You cannot save another life by giving up your own." Henry turned his head away. "I wasn't trying to be brave. I was just choosing." The doctor softened. "You don't have many of those choices left. Not alone." That night, Henry lay awake thinking of the barn, of Morrow lying down beside him, of the quiet way the horse had given back everything Henry had poured into him. "I didn't save you alone," Henry realized. "We saved each other." When Henry was discharged a week later, he returned home thinner, weaker, but changed. He walked slowly into the barn, heart pounding not with illness this time, but fear. Morrow stood inside his stall. He was still thin, still fragile, but his eyes were clearer now. His ears lifted the instant Henry appeared. For a long moment, neither moved. Then Morrow took one careful step forward. Henry reached out, resting his hand against the horse's face, fingers trembling. "You stayed," he whispered. "You could have walked away." Morrow breathed softly against his palm. Henry sank onto a stool, exhausted. "I can't do it like before," he said quietly. "I can't disappear trying to save you." Morrow stood close, steady. That evening, Henry made another choice, the hardest one yet. He called his daughter. She arrived 2 days later, eyes filled with concern when she saw him, and understanding when she saw the horse. "You did this alone too long," she said gently. Henry nodded. "I didn't want to be a burden." She took his hand. "Love isn't a burden." Together, they made a plan. Help would come now. Food would be shared. Care would be balanced. Henry would eat. Morrow would heal. No one would be saved at the expense of the other again. As the sun set over the pasture, Henry sat near the fence, Morrow grazing close by. "We almost lost everything," Henry murmured, "because I thought sacrifice meant giving myself away." Morrow lifted his head, ears flicking. Henry smiled faintly. "Turns out, sacrifice also means letting others help." The horse stepped closer, lowering his head. Henry rested his forehead against Morrow's neck, breathing in familiar scent of hay and earth. They were both still here, not because one had given everything, but because both had learned how to stay. Healing, Henry Caldwell learned, was not heroic. It did not arrive with strength or relief or certainty. It came quietly, unevenly, with days that felt hopeful and others that felt like setbacks disguised as progress. Morrow's recovery was slow. The horse gained weight by ounces, not pounds. His coat regained a faint shine, but the bones beneath still whispered of how close he had come to disappearing. He tired easily, slept often, and startled at small changes, a door closing too loudly, a sudden movement in the barn. Henry recognized that fear. It lived in him now, too, with his daughter Claire staying in the house. The days followed a careful routine. Meals were shared, real meals, warm and filling. Claire insisted Henry finish his plate, watching him with a patience that carried both love and warning. "You don't get to give yourself away anymore," she said gently one evening, not to prove anything. Henry nodded, though the words stung. He had never meant to prove anything. He had only wanted to keep Morrow alive. But guilt lingered. At night, Henry dreamed of empty cupboards and silent barns. He dreamed of Morrow collapsing again. This time because Henry had eaten too much, rested too long, trusted too easily. He woke often, heart racing, breath shallow. One morning, as Henry brushed Morrow's neck, he noticed something that made his hands freeze. A tremor. It passed quickly, just a subtle shudder through the horse's flank. But it was enough. Henry's chest tightened. "No!" he whispered. "Please, no." He called the vet immediately. After a thorough check, she leaned back on her heels and sighed. "It's not a setback," she said. "It's exhaustion. Healing takes energy. You can't expect a straight line." Henry nodded, but fear didn't leave. Later that day, he sat alone on the porch while Morrow rested in the shade. Claire was inside, making soup, humming softly. Henry stared out at the pasture, hands clasped tightly. What if I'm not enough anymore? What if my love nearly killed us both? The thought was unbearable. That evening, Henry surprised Claire by speaking aloud. "I almost lost him because of what I did," he said quietly, staring into his bowl. "I thought starving myself was love." Claire set her spoon down. "You thought sacrifice meant disappearing," she said gently. "But love isn't subtraction. It's balance." Henry swallowed hard. "I don't trust myself anymore." Claire reached across the table and took his hand. "Then trust me. Trust the help. Trust that staying alive is not selfish." The words settled slowly, painfully. The true test came 2 days later. A storm rolled in unexpectedly. Heavy rain, sudden wind. The pasture flooded in places, water pooling near the lower fence line. Morrow stood restless in the barn, ears flicking, muscles tense. Henry felt the old instinct surge inside him. Move him. Fix it yourself. Don't wait. His heart began to race. He grabbed his coat, stepping toward the door. Then he stopped. The room spun slightly. His chest tightened, not with illness, but with memory. He sat down. "Claire," he called out, voice shaking, "I need help." She appeared instantly. Together, they moved Morrow to higher ground, slowly, carefully. Henry leaned on Claire when he needed to. He rested when his breath shortened. He did not push. The storm passed. Nothing was lost. That night, Henry sat beside Morrow's stall, exhausted but calm. "I would have done it alone before," he whispered, "and I might not be here now." Morrow lifted his head slightly, eyes soft. "I'm learning," Henry said, slowly. Weeks passed. Morrow grew stronger. Henry did too, not in body, but in presence. He laughed more, slept better, ate without guilt. One afternoon, Henry noticed Morrow standing at the fence again, just like before, not waiting anxiously, but peacefully. Henry walked out and stood beside him. "We're still here," he whispered, "both of us." But deep inside, a final fear lingered. Healing did not erase the past, and Henry knew that one day, sooner or later, he would have to face the truth he had avoided since the beginning. Morrow might not have many years left. Neither might he. And loving something fragile meant accepting that saving it once did not mean saving it forever. As the sun dipped low, Henry rested his hand against Morrow's warm neck, feeling the steady breath beneath his palm. "I won't disappear again," he promised softly, "no matter how scared I am." The promise was not loud, but it was honest,